So look, I'm just delighted to welcome you here to the Teagasc Crops Forum here today. Delighted you could make it with the fantastic weather that's out there, and we're probably missing a good few people because we even had an apology from one of our panel members who was stuck under a combine last night and stuck under a combine today, so just couldn't make it. So that's very understandable given the weather that's in it. My name is Michael Hennessy. I'm the head of Crops Knowledge Transfer here in Teagasc. So look, I'm delighted you could come, and we're going to kick this off. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping first. This is a hybrid event, so it's going out, it's obviously live and it's going out over Zoom as well. So from that point of view on Zoom, we do have a camera on the audience, so you just be aware of that, as it's going out, you can be recorded on that. So other than that, the exits, I think you can see all the exits out either side. It's one of the really nice years. We can leave every door in the place open, and I hope that we get a nice little bit of wind coming through the place so we don't overheat. And with that, look, I'm going to start out because we are scheduled to start at 2 o'clock. So with that, I want to introduce Frank O'Mara, Professor Frank O'Mara, to open the conference or the forum for us today. Frank.
Thank you very much, Michael, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, both here in the room and those that have joined us online. Look, I'm delighted to be here today to open the Crops Forum. We've got an excellent lineup of speakers, so hopefully it's going to be a very good afternoon. Look, as we sit in here with 29 degrees or so outside, it probably reminds us back maybe to the great weather that we had last year, when at this time last year you would have been sitting here having wrapped up the harvest, having good prospect of going to receive good prices and having achieved very, very good yields. Well, this year, today's weather is very much an aberration. We've had a very, very difficult year weather-wise. We did get very high temperatures this year already. We did get good dry weather, and we did get plenty of rain, but we got them all really at the wrong times. So certainly for tillage farmers. So it certainly has been a difficult year for tillage farmers, and that has made obviously it has had a big impact on the yields of our crops. The yields this year, they've been pretty mixed. There have been some very low yields, and there also have been some quite high yields, but I suppose we've had none of the record yields at all that we had last year, and average yields would be back, I think, on all farms compared to last year. Around this part of the country and down where I've come from just today, down in Carlow, late sown spring cereals, they've performed poorly, and they're going to struggle to cover their costs. And I suppose, when we talk about costs, we have to acknowledge that we have much higher costs of production this year as well. There are very high costs of production this year, and that coupled, we had that last year as well, but I guess we had a very good grain price to cover that, whereas this year grain prices are back a lot. So all in all, I suppose it's going to make a difficult financial year for tillage farmers. And I suppose, look, you're all well aware that's not the finances are obviously hugely important, but they're not the only pressure point on tillage farmers at the moment. And a big issue that has been with us for the last year is the access to land, and that's not going to be made any easier by the announcement on Wednesday about the nitrates derogation. And there are other things, I suppose, that are challenging the sector in terms of the cost of machinery and all the environmental constraints that farmers have to be mindful of now. So look, when we come to the end of certainly the cereal harvesting end of the tillage year, our overall acreage is down a little bit, and our yields are down, so there's obviously going to be a fairly significant drop in production of cereal crops. So look, that's the backdrop, or that's where we are, I suppose, as we stand here today. So look, in Teagasc, what can we do about that? Well, obviously, we can't affect a lot of those issues that are impacting on you, but we are committed to supporting farmers through what are quite challenging times, and our local advisors are available and will be available to help with financial plans and for all the advice around the agronomy of crops for the coming season. I'm sure some of you at least were down in Oak Park for our Crops Open Day earlier in the summer, and look, hopefully, like me, you were impressed with the breadth of research that's going on there to support the tillage industry. And it's not just the colleagues in Oak Park that are now involved in research that supports the tillage sector, but from several other of our research centres. And, I see Gary Lanigan from Johnstown Castle here in the audience today. So, there's research from right around the Teagasc portfolio, I suppose, that's relevant to tillage farmers in areas, I suppose, outside of the normal crop areas, and things like soil health and soil quality and utilisation of nutrients and many other areas. But look, there's lots of issues, I suppose, that research has to deal with, and hopefully we're covering those reasonably well in our crops research programme in Oak Park. On the environmental side, one of the big outputs that we've had this year was the MAC, Marginal Abatement Cost Curve, or MAC 2023, that we published in July of this year. And that points out the measures that tillage farmers can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And also a lot of those measures contribute to reducing nitrate loss, which is very important in relation to the water quality issue that I referred to earlier, and also help to store more carbon in the soils. And we see a little bit of movement in relation to schemes or programmes that might reward farmers in relation to carbon sequestration. We've been reporting on greenhouse gas emissions from all the various enterprises for about 10 years now in our National Farm Survey Sustainability Report. And that's going to be published. The 2022 results are due out in about 3 weeks, I think, from that National Farm Survey team. But look, they're not going to say anything different in relation to tillage crops than what we've been saying for over that period, which is that tillage farms have the lowest emissions per hectare of all the main enterprises that we have here in Ireland. But there are areas which can still be improved. And when a number of the measures that are identified in the MAC are utilised on tillage farms, well, we're actually getting quite low to being able to run a carbon neutral tillage system. So today at the forum you will hear more detail about those MAC measures and how they're not just being supported by the Teagasc Signpost programme, but also I think we hope to hear from a farmer in the programme who's implementing environmental measures on his farm. I hope that's not the man who was under the combine last night, is it? No, good. Fixing the combine in fairness. Fixing it, okay, yeah. And so look, I think that's a very important topic, obviously, and one of interest, I'm sure, to you. And we'll also hear how EU policy on using pesticides, and obviously they're a very, very important part of tillage crop production here in Ireland. So how that policy is going to affect you as farmers in the coming years, but also how you can put in place actions to decrease the effect or the impact of these changes on your system. Our final session then today will deal with how the tillage sector can develop over the coming years. And you're probably all aware that the Department of Agriculture, the Minister, set up what's called the Food Vision Tillage Group to help guide initiatives that can be implemented in the industry to reach the targets set down in the Climate Action Plan, which are to increase the area of land under tillage. So this group has been meeting regularly over the summer, and a final report is due shortly, and I think we'll all be anxious to see that report. The final report, I think, the first report is due shortly, and the final report is due to be produced in October, but I guess it depends maybe how much discussion and debate will go on around the first report. So this forum anyway, look, we'll be discussing those type of issues and what initiatives we can take for the tillage sector, and this is a chance here in this forum for you to feed your ideas or to put your ideas forward. So look, overall I hope today will be a very good opportunity for you to go away from here with some new knowledge, and as I said, also to feed into maybe the future development of the industry. I hope you enjoy the afternoon and the presentations that are going to be here today and the discussion that will go on around those. And before I finish up, I'd just like to wish you well with the remainder of this year's work, which has been a pretty difficult and challenging tillage year, and to wish you the best of luck for next year's season, which will start off pretty soon, and hopefully the weather will cooperate a little bit better for us in the next growing season than it has over the last growing season. So, Gor Míle Maith Agam.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm delighted you could join us here today, and I know certainly tillage within Teagasc is a very important aspect of what we do. So with that, I'm going to invite Dr. Ewan Mullins to the stage to chair the first session. And with that, I'm just going to bring up the first. Okay, I'll leave you to it.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So we'll get straight into it. The first session, the season ahead, and where integrated pest management forms part of everyday decisions. So we've three speakers, Cara, Shay, and Andrew. So we're going to get straight into it. I would encourage the speakers to keep it to, I know Michael has said 12 minutes. If you can cut it down to maybe 10 or 11, that'd be great, because we're going to get questions from the floor. And really, the interaction and the engagement is really important. So we'll get straight off with Cara McCain from the DAFN, and Cara, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much to Teagasc for the invite here today. I'm going to talk on winter crop BCU trials results and recommended lists. I suppose an overview of what I'm talking about. First of all, we have be talking about winter barley, winter oats, winter wheat, winter oilseed rape, and be dealing. Just mentioning an NGT consultation that was we launched this week. Suppose first of all, value for cultivation and use trials. They're very comprehensive and robust trialing system. It's an independent system, and it provides very useful information to Irish growers on the varieties that are best suited for growing in Irish conditions. You can see there the number of trials that we have. The big crops: winter wheat, winter barley. 8 sites for RL, 40 varieties of winter barley, 30 varieties of winter wheat. So an extremely comprehensive training system. We have changed in response to industry needs over the years. The loss of neonicotinoid seed dressings has resulted in a big interest in BYDV tolerant and resistant varieties. We've introduced no insecticide trials to look at the performance of varieties under BYDV stress, and I suppose the final output is the recommended list. There's 3 years of data before a variety makes a recommended list, and there is a health warning with 1 and 2 year data. And I suppose given the year that we've just had, it's been a real tough year for growers, for growing crops, and it has really tested varieties, and you'll see some of that now in my presentation. Here last year, I was asked about the performance of 2 rows when sown next to 6 rows. And it was something that we looked into. The HDB kindly shared data with us on this, and it showed that on average, 2 rows performance was adversely affected by 1 to 2% per year. So we changed to sowing the trial by ear type. So we blocked by ear type. So you can see here, you have 4 reps. 2 rows in one block, 6 rows in another block, and the 2 rows are on the left up through the 4 reps, and 6 rows on the right up through the 4 reps. There's 2-row discard and a 2-row discard between both varieties to ensure that there's no effect on yield. I suppose getting into the winter barley recommended list trial in 23, the 22 and 21 results are included here. The varieties in dark blue are already recommended from last year. And you can see on the right hand side the percentage of the area and percentage area and seed certification for each of those varieties. So performance relatively stable for most of the provisionally for the recommended varieties. Suppose Armadillo has gone up a point. I would say Infinity probably dropping off the list this year. We have 4 candidates: Canyon, Molly, Resolute, and Fearless. And I suppose if you look at the varieties with the asterisks next to them, those are varieties with a breeder claim for BYDV tolerance. So that's not verified by the department, but the information is there for breeders. I suppose the other interesting thing there is if you look at KWS Donau and Paraska, fairly poor performance in trial. That was very evident early on. Those varieties weren't supposed to go into RL trial. We didn't receive seed in time for other varieties. Those were supposed to go into the NL trial, effectively screening. So it just goes to show you the value of screening for varieties. Just some of the things that we've seen on trial. This Molly is the candidate for the recommended list, BYDV resistant claim versus Infinity, which doesn't, and you can clearly see the BYDV in Infinity and no visible effects of BYDV in Molly. Straw breakdown then during the year. You've SY Luna there in July, standing perfectly, early July. Here you have Virus, which was a variety, a candidate. You can see fairly serious straw breakdown in early July there, and in the OBS plots there was it was worse again at harvest time. On the right here we have Bordeaux at harvest. Bordeaux has dropped back 2 points this year on the recommended list. So moving on to the recommended list, Bazooka's dropped off, Armadillo's upgraded to fully recommended, Bordeaux remains provisionally recommended for a second year, and Molly has been added as a recommended variety. The recommended list is on the department website, and you can reach it at that link. I suppose very quickly, the gap between the 2 rows and the 6 rows probably narrowed in the last year. That may be down to the blocking by type. It may have an effect on that. I suppose the other general point, the screenings have gone down. 2020 figures have gone out, so that's resulted in lower screenings. In relation to Molly, I suppose the weaknesses it has is in regard to resistance to lodging with a score of 5, and hectoliter weight. It's the lowest there on the list, but I suppose with regard to strengths, the disease resistance profile there is quite strong, with an 8 for mildew, 7 for Rinco, 7 for brown rust, and of course it has the double asterisk for BYDV resistance. Winter oats, there's not a lot to say. There's only 2 varieties in seed certification, Husky and Isabel, and they will remain on the list. So very little to say on those. Isabel probably the flag bearer in terms of standing ability and quality. So there's the results from the winter oats trial. As you can see, there's some potential there in some varieties, but I would still say Husky and Isabel are the ones to beat. In terms of winter oilseed rape, I promised Michael I wouldn't talk about this, but we felt we had to. A very simple message. The recommended list varieties are on a level that other varieties that are available commercially are not. We've seen those varieties in trial and they haven't performed to the same level. DK expansion was on another level when it came in. That was replaced by Ambassador and Aurelia. Those were on a higher level. And next year, Averon is likely to join the recommended list. That's on another level again. And some varieties that are available commercially abroad they have had a 23% lower yield than the controls this year on trial. So for a 2 ton a hectare, 5.5 ton, 2 ton an acre crop, you're talking almost half a ton less based on yield. With Clearfields, there's a yield lag that's well accepted. We've seen lodge and stem stiffness issues with them. The blunt message is choose a recommended list variety. With regard to winter wheat, the 2024 recommended list will be out next week. Our last trial site was harvested this week. There's 15 varieties in the RL and 15 varieties in the national list. The changes for this year will be Costello and Cider will drop off the list. There's no candidates for 2024. As preliminary analysis presented here, so it is subject to change and other sites have to be included. I suppose the big story in winter wheat this year has been significant lodging that was observed in trials in the south of the country. So On winter wheat, you can see there the top 5 varieties will be on the recommended list. Graham's performance has probably fallen back a bit on last year, and then I suppose the big story then is in relation to or not the big you can see there you have no candidates for recommendation, but you have varieties coming behind with 2 years done. You can see there Champion is 2 years done, 17% of the seed available, and I will deal with that in a minute. Those are the remainder of the varieties that are left on trial. I suppose in regard to lodging, the picture here of Bamford in early July, you have KW 254819, and as you can see, Graham has a score of 7 on the recommended list and as you can see, it's living up to that. And again, Dawson, I think it's a score of 7 again. Alwyn, along with Fitzroy, were probably 2 of the best standing varieties, and Mayflower is there as well. It's in between. I suppose in relation to Champion, it's touch and go. It has that yield potential. It has good disease resistance, but when it comes to standing ability, there are questions there over it. And if it does make a recommended list next year, it's likely that it would have a lodging resistance of 4. And we saw a bit of sprouting as well. There you have Spearhead. It has a score of 4 for sprouting on the recommended list. So that's unsurprising this year. I suppose it's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the trailing process. I suppose time is limited. I suppose our division also deals with farm safety. I know harvest is almost finished, but just think farm safety and everything you do. And every death on a farm is one too many. So keep that in mind. And I suppose finally, as related to some of the other topics here today, the European Commission announced a proposal on new genomic techniques on the 5th of July this year. It's been a long road to get there since European Court of Justice decision in 2018. The consultation is open for another 2 weeks. It affects everybody in this room. It affects the tillage sector. So make sure you have your say, and you can do that. The details are on that link, and you can email your submission to the department. Okay, with that, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara, for keeping the time. That's great. And for what you were talking about. So just to be clear, the recommended list is out next week?
Winter wheat and winter oats next week.
Brilliant, excellent.
Winter barley is out this week already.
Okay, great. So I should have said at the start, obviously for attendees who are online, you're very welcome, obviously, to ask questions via the Zoom, and Dermot here will relay them back. There is one question, Dermot.
You want that one now?
Yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead.
The one that came in here is basically, can the department or indeed any breeder representative explain the difference between BYDV tolerance and BYDV resistance?
Yeah, I suppose resistance, you won't see any effect of BYDV on the variety. With tolerance, you may see some effect on the variety in the trial, or maybe some yellowing in the variety. And again, that's a breeder claim. It's not verified by the department, but we have seen BYDV tolerant and resistant varieties doing very well last year in 2022 when there was a high BYDV pressure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cara. So Andrew, I'd like to ask you to come up, please. So this is Andrew Owen Griffiths, head of the unit in DJ Sante, going to talk about the direction of the EU pesticides.
Right forward, it's this button. Okay. Great, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello to those online and everyone here. I should introduce myself. My name is Andrew Owen Griffiths. I work for the Director General for Health and Food Safety in the European Commission. Unusually, I'm based next to the Teagasc Research Facility in Grange, so I've taken the advantage to come here rather than travelling from Brussels. I'm going to give you a short presentation on the sustainable use of pesticides and the current review of legislation on the sustainable use of pesticides. I've only got 10 minutes. It's a complicated topic, so I'll try and give a very brief overview and give you some references for further information, plus chance to ask questions. So the starting point is the framework policy of the European Green Deal, which is something I'm sure you're aware of, and in particular the farm to fork strategy, which is a strategy to move towards more sustainable farming in Europe by 2030. As part of that comprehensive strategy that covers issues like climate action, which I'm not going to mention because it's dealt with by the second presentation, there's a number of targets set, including on antimicrobial resistance, fertilizer use, but I'm going to concentrate particularly on the target here on the left, on the reduction by 50% of the use and risk of pesticides by 2030. Now, the starting point for the rest of the talk is really that target and how we aim to try and achieve that target. So perhaps I need to explain that target first of all. First of all, it's not a legally binding target. It's an ambitious and forward-looking target to affect policy. Secondly, it's not removing 50% of pesticides from your use and your availability. It's weighted by the risk of the pesticides. So the weighting moves between 1 for low-risk substances and 64 for emergency authorizations. So a lot of how this target is going to be met is by bringing available lower risk substances, which have a lower weighting, and removing through the authorization process more harmful substances, which get the higher weighting. So it's also across the EU. It's not specifically at one member state or at tillage or one particular type of agriculture. And it's not even specific to agriculture. There is a significant amount of plant protection use that falls outside of agriculture in forestry, in road maintenance, in railways, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the actions can be taken outside of agriculture. So as part of this policy, a number of actions are stated. And the two most relevant here are that the Commission will review the legislation on the sustainable use of pesticides, and also that we will produce legislation, which we've already done, to speed up the bringing of biocontrol substances, biological active substances to the market. So to speed up the process for the approval of these products, these lower risk products, so that there are more products available. I suppose there's a lot of other actions as well. We've already heard mention of the new genomic technique proposal, which is part of the same package, which is in consultation. There's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of support to member states in approving low-risk substances and biocontrol. But I haven't got time to go through them all. So just to explain, it's not just one piece of legislation, it's a packet of actions, of which there are a significant number. Why did we decide we needed to do this new piece of legislation? Well, again, there's a whole raft of legislation. You could spend weeks reading them, of documents, sorry, you could spend weeks reading them. But as I understand, you'll get this presentation afterwards. The reference here is to some of the key documents that explain the impact assessment that was carried out on the Sustainable Use Directive. Basically, it wasn't being applied properly, and it wasn't being applied uniformly throughout Europe. So we had a big variation. Some member states were doing a good job. Some member states were doing a bad job. And even for some of the main provisions, there was variation within a single member state. So within regions, or even sometimes within municipalities, there was a different approach being taken to how pesticides are used and how restrictions are put in place. So we decided we needed a more uniform application and to produce a regulation rather than a directive which preceded this. There have been 3 public consultations, like the one you just mentioned on NGT. There's been a various number of documents which are produced here, which are all freely available and published and on our website. So we're talking about this target. This target that we're talking about starts in 2017. We use a 3-year baseline because pesticide use varies from year to year. So we use 3 years to try and provide a level base. And how are we doing? Well, essentially, we've nearly reached the target, which is set for 2030 already. So we've achieved a reduction. We only need another 17% reduction between now and 2030. So in a 4-year period, we've achieved 33%. In essence, we are doing much better than we projected and than we anticipated, even before the policy that we propose comes in place. So there's obviously, and we believe there's been a lot of changes since there's been discussion on the legislation. You'll see the figure drops quite significantly from 2019 to 2022 figures. I ought to explain there's a delay in reporting for pesticide use and sales data. So the most up-to-date figure we've got is for 2021. So that's at EU level. So how are you doing? I suppose is the next question. Well, the answer is very well. Ireland is one of only 3 member states that have actually met the target already. So the action that's been taken in Ireland between 2017 and 2021 has led to a reduction that we projected EU level by 2030. So in effect, I'm not saying you don't need to do any more, but if you don't reverse that trend, then Ireland is one of very few member states who should be commended for actually reaching the target for reduction already. I can't tell you what factors led to that reduction. That's for the Irish Competent Authority to tell you. But there will be a range of different factors, and I'll touch on some of them in a minute. There is a second target to specifically reduce the more hazardous substances. These are the category called candidates for substitution. A candidate for substitution is a potentially harmful chemical, and when it's approved, but when it's for renewal, a comparative assessment should be done, and if there are other substances available, it should be removed from the market, so the approval shouldn't be given again. Between 2011 and 2017, the figure actually went up slightly, so the policy wasn't working. We were seeing gradually, despite the fact some big substances were removed from the market, they were being substituted by other more hazardous substances, so the sales figure actually went up slightly. So that was against the policy. So we set a second target to try and incentivize the removal of more hazardous substances. And you can see this reduction is started, but it still needs further action. Okay, so at EU level, from discussion with member states, what factors are influencing this reduction? Well, and I stress this is at EU level. I can't specify at Irish level. That's for you to talk about. But first of all, there's a lot of research and activity, both at EU level, but also at member state level, and Teagasc is part of that. There is, as I said, the ongoing non-renewal of certain substances, which will happen whether this policy this regulation is in place or not. It's part of the natural bringing on the market of lower risk substances and the removal of more hazardous substances. There's increases in precision farming, spot application, data analysis, data collection, low drift nozzles, and so on and so forth that can affect reducing pesticide application with the same effect. There's an increased availability of non-chemical alternatives, including biological control, but also other substances. There's a second target on the increase in organic farming. So an increase in organic farming will reduce the level of pesticide use as well. We are trying to incentivize, and we are proposing, as we have, the new genomic technique legislation, which will allow a much more rapid and easy approval of crops and varieties that are resistant. We know there's a lot of work going on. There can't be trials yet, field trials, but there's a lot of laboratory work going on at EU level, developing drought-resistant varieties, for example. And if this legislation is put in place, it will allow very quickly those varieties to become commercialized and on the market. And then finally, and what we see as key to reaching the target is to improve the implementation of integrated pest management. Strong link to the next presentation, where when we look before this legislation was brought into place, the existing provisions for IPM, we asked member states what the level of IPM application was. None of them knew. Some of them said 100% because it's a legally requirement, so it had to be in place. Some of them said 0%. Most of them made a guess based on some surveys or some actions that were very crop specific. So we know, and there's various research supporting it, that IPM integrated pest management, which considers economic activity and economic inputs and outputs as well, is something that can be implemented better. Again, I've not got time to go through the legislation in detail, but the legislation proposal, which is currently being discussed in Council, so with member states, including representatives of Ireland, but also in the European Parliament, contains a number of provisions, and a lot of these are very similar to the provisions that are in place already in the Sustainable Use Directive that's been in place for since 2009. So, first of all, we propose legally binding targets at EU level and member state level, rather than the advisory targets in the Farm to Fork. Secondly, national action plans, which are what the member state does to translate these policies to specific actions in their own member state. We give them more structure and give more reporting on those, because at the moment member states take a very varied approach to these. We also ask member states to set national targets, so to translate the EU targets into targets at a national level that support that. We make proposals to make IPM more implementable, including crop-specific rules, the registration of certain actions, and annual advice, independent advice. We have proposals on reducing pesticide use in sensitive areas, including in urban areas and environmentally sensitive areas. We have further action on reducing aerial spraying, but promoting the use or allowing the use of application by drones. We define independent advisors. We define biocontrol as well. We propose a register of pesticide application equipment. At the moment, pesticide application equipment has to be inspected, but it doesn't have to be registered. So we know at EU level how many have been inspected, but we don't know how many have not been inspected. So it makes sense to have a register. And then we also provide a derogation to the Common Agricultural Policy provision to enable funding to be used for the provisions above. I'm running out of time. I've already mentioned that it's not acting in isolation. There's various other actions and legislation. Some of these I'm repeating, but I also mention the statistics on pesticide use. So there's a piece of legislation called the Agricultural Statistic Input and Output Regulation, which basically provides for member states to provide information to the Commission on pesticide use. So it requires electronic keeping of pesticide application data at farm level. And this will help us greatly, because at the moment we don't know much about pesticide use at EU level. We know what's sold, but we don't know how or where it's used. And I won't go into detail, but there's a lot of action and a lot of consideration on bringing alternatives to the market. We know if IPM is going to work properly, not only do we need the research, but we need the alternatives on the market and part of the toolbox that the farmer can then use to make decisions and to choose lower risk alternatives. So we're currently in discussion, or the Parliament is currently in discussion on amendments to the Commission proposal, suggesting or still indicating a vote in Parliament in plenary in Strasbourg in November. And we are now under the Spanish presidency, and we are starting next week with the discussion on the two sort of sensitive topics, difficult topics that we haven't discussed yet, which are target setting at member state level and sensitive areas. So we'll see how progress gets with the Spanish presidency. So I didn't check my time, but I hope I've not talked too quickly, and thank you for your attention.
Great. We have a bit of time for questions from the floor. If anybody's interested, please to ask a question now or to hold it until after Shay's talk. We have one question online. Dermot?
Yeah, the one is that is I suppose the likely inevitable development of resistance in lower risk products when you take away the less safe high risk products, if you like. Is that taken into account when substitution is being considered?
Yeah, it is indeed, and resistance is one of the principles inherent in integrated pest management and how you manage the use of plant protection products. And in fact, I mean, conversely, we would think that if this policy goes ahead, we're looking, the basic idea is to bring more low risk alternatives to the market. There is likely to be less resistance problems if you've got bigger choice of different tools, maybe low, because most low risk or biocontrol substances, you don't take a chemical substance, take it off the market and replace it with one biocontrol substance. You need a bigger toolbox of more precise and more specific tools that will replace that one chemical. So the use of different tools means that resistance is less likely to be a problem than if you're using the same chemical substance over and over again. But it's inherent in IP, or I'm sure it'll come out in the IPM presentation, but resistance is an inherent step in assessing how IPM works.
Okay. Is there one more, Dermot?
Yeah, no, there's not really, no.
Okay, no problem. Well, look, we can continue the conversation. Thank you, Andrew. So next up is Shay Phelan, well known to everybody. Shay is a specialist in Teagasc, going to talk about the work that's ongoing in the IPM sphere at the moment. Sorry, no, I think that's you there. That's right.
See it up there, I can't see it in front of me. Okay, thanks, Ewan. Good afternoon, everybody. As Ewan said, I'm just going to take you through a project that myself and a couple of the farmers here actually in the audience are involved in, and a couple of our advisors are involved in as well, called IPM Works. And maybe it might give us a nod to where we might be going. Listen to what Andrew's after been saying for the last few minutes and where we might be going in the future. So basically, what is IPM Works? IPM Works is an EU-wide network of demonstrating IPM techniques. So it's basically demonstrating techniques that are already there, okay? And some of those might be a lot simpler than what you think. They're likes of crop rotation, likes of selecting resistant or tolerant varieties, as Cara said here a few minutes ago. So it's a lot of, it's not this highfalutin thing that we often kind of think might be what IPM Works is all about. And I suppose really what it's looking at is promoting those IPM strategies from farmers to farmers, okay? And we always know that, you know, if you want to learn something, you learn it from a peer. You don't necessarily learn it from the likes of me, but you learn it from practicing people who are practicing these techniques already. And I suppose the other thing to look at is what we're trying to do is trying to develop tools and develop helps and advice to farmers and to advisors to see what can they do practically on the ground and what might be effective and what might not be effective. The Irish hub here is an arable hub. There are lots of different hubs around Europe. You can see on the map here, there are 16 different countries, and they're not all similar to ourselves. If you take it here, the Nordic countries and the countries up here, the likes of the UK, the Benelux countries, Poland, Germany, they're the type of countries we're kind of mirroring, if you like, in terms of some of the actions that they're doing as well. And I suppose really one of the things we wanted to have a look at is some of these decision support tools that are out there and how they can be, or are they effective tools to give us advice, not necessarily solving problems, but giving us advice. And probably the one that we're all most familiar with is the blight warning system. I'll come to that in a few minutes. So I'm delighted to say we have 7 different farms around the country. 2 of them are here already today. And we have them from up the northeast all the way down to Darren, who's going to talk later on down here in the south in Cork. We have a number of advisors here involved with those farms. Myself and Kieran and Stephen are also loosely involved as well. And I suppose one of the things that we did look at when we were talking about IPM Works and we looked at what these farms are actually doing, we thought that these were probably ideal farms to mirror or to get into the signpost program. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on as well in the next session. So there's a lot of synergies there, if you like, between both IPM Works and signpost. So we're looking at the farms and we went and visited all the farms to try to see what were the main issues on the farms. And you have them listed there. So obviously disease management is one, septoria being a big problem and septoria control. And again, Hara's just mentioned there, we don't have a whole lot of varieties out there. So what do you do with those varieties? How do you manage those? And I suppose one of the things we did look at in some of the farms were mixing varieties. And I know that's common in other European countries, especially in Denmark, where they mix varieties quite a lot, to try and get benefits from, or maximize the benefits from different varieties. BYDV is probably the big one that we're really looking at here, majoring on in this part of the world. And it's something we'll have a look at, as is weed control. And I suppose grass weeds, it's kind of pertinent that we talk about grass weeds because we know we have a growing problem with grass weeds in this country. And we're actually finishing up a project later on this year, which is looking specifically at grass weed projects and how they can be controlled in conservation agricultural systems. Use of organic manures, I suppose, is something that we look at in the project as well. This is an example here from Tom Barry's farm down in Cork, where he's spreading pig slurry on an existing crop of winter barley. And that photograph was taken last March or April. So it's those type of measures that we're looking at, all the while in the background, thinking about the targets that Andrew has talked about in the last few minutes. So I'm not going to get into IPM triangles and all that. You all know what IPM triangles signify. We've been trying to get people to move where pesticides are the last option. I certainly grew up or came through an era where they were the first port of call. So if you had a problem, you called your agronomist. I need a problem to be fixed. What can I spray on the crop to fix it? And that's where we've come from in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I suppose really what we're looking at now is the flip side of that, where we have to make a number of interventions before we get to this case here, where we need a pesticide to finish off the control system. And that's something that takes learning that we're all going to have to probably relearn, if you like, over the next number of years. And again, those 4 steps, if we like, of IPM, this is something that Brian Duggan, who did a master's with us a number of years ago, would have come up with. There's prevention and suppression. So you're combining as many approaches as you possibly can to avoid increasing risks. Second thing then is monitoring. Monitor your crops. And by monitoring, I don't mean leave it to your agronomist to do it. That's farmers, that's ourselves doing it as well. And we actually have to take some of the responsibility here. Monitor our crops, keep our records, look at the weather situations, look at what that's affecting crops. This year, anybody who was growing potatoes, it had a huge effect on what they were able to do this year. And then when you gather all that evidence, you're able to make a decision, okay? Hopefully it's the right decision, but it might not always be. And those tools then are used to make your decisions. So you decide what's the most suitable pest management strategy to implement on your farm. And I suppose then at the very end, when you do that, you evaluate how the system worked for you. Did it work? Did it not work? And if it didn't work, more importantly, why didn't it work? And how do I need to change for next year? And that doesn't necessarily mean, do I change sprayers? Do I change the operators? Do I change agronomists? It might mean I might have to change the system that I'm comfortable with. So it's kind of mea culpa in some of those circumstances. So this is one of the areas that we're looking at in IPM Works, is all these different decision support tools that we have that are being developed. Many of these over here you'll see on my right, on your left, are all the different ones that are being developed all across Europe for different scenarios. Okay, some for glass houses, some for outdoor crops, so on and so forth. Some for fruit, some for veg, and some for cereal crops as well, or broadacre crops as well. A couple of ones that I'm looking at here: barley out of wildfires, and obviously potato blight, coming from where I'm coming from. They're two of the systems that the IPM Works decision support tools use. This one here is the T-sum model for warning about barley out of wildfires risks, and the other one here is Hutton periods for potato blight. So if you look at these decision support tools in Ireland and what are we seeing with these so far, and we've looked at these for years and years and years. 20 odd years ago, I was looking at a thing called a Septoria timer. Some of you might have been familiar with. Some of you would have been looking at some of the blight prediction models that we would have been looking at, like Negfry and things like that years and years ago. And I suppose one of the things that we were able to say with those is that they really have a limited use, in my opinion, in Ireland for the systems and the climate that we have here. They do give us information, and ones like the blight warning advice tool from Met Hearing does give us good advice, does give us good information about the risk that your crop is under. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it tells you the risk that's there, and it's up to you then to make a decision whether you use that information or not. It's really looking at what we're trying to do is validate some of these existing models in an Irish situation. And if we take the T-sum one here, and we'll go through it in more details in a few minutes. T-sum for aphid control is based on accumulated degree days. Okay, so it looks at a target of 170 degree days. And once this tool hits that 170 degree days, it triggers an alarm to say, listen, your crop is at risk, or potentially your crop is at risk. Okay, but it doesn't take into consideration whether you've sprayed it before, where the crop is, the location, anything like that. It does take into account data sowing, of course, but it doesn't take other things into consideration. So really, I suppose, you wonder how accurate it is. To my mind, it can be accurate, but the big downfall I see with it is it can ask you to apply multiple applications if you were to follow it strictly. Okay, and Dr. Louise McNamara would show that that's probably not best practice. And exactly as Andrew was talking about in terms of resistance, we can build up resistance quite quickly if we're going to apply multiple insecticides onto a crop. And this is some part of the work that Louise is actually carrying on at the moment as part of another project. You're all familiar with the aphid tower that we have in Oak Park. We have another one in Cork. We have another one in Ashtown and Dublin. And basically what we're trying to do with this is to try and be more accurate about our advice in future in terms of the risk that it is to your crops in terms of BYDV. So the tower, as you all know, is like a big upside down hoover. It's sucking in any insect that flies over that, and it's giving us a pattern for an area around that suction tower, okay? And what we're also doing here on some of the farms is we're also doing this yellow trapping as well on some of the IPM Works farms. So what we're trying to do is relate what's the information the guys are gathering here in Oak Park to what we're actually seeing here in fields. There's 20 something of these, I think, around the country. So we're able to get a good handle as to the information coming from this one here in Oak Park, relating that to the one in Cork and to the one in Ashtown. And then we're able to see what's actually on the ground, collate the data and see, can we develop a risk tool to say that's going to be more robust. For any of you that are like me or my vintage, you'll remember we used to do this with Mars Paddock in Oak Park. We used to publish every month how many aphids were being trapped in Mars Paddock in Oak Park. But what we found on review was that wasn't terribly accurate and that it could give a lot of needless information, or not of needless information, but recommendations that weren't really following through in the amount of instances of BYDV that we were seeing in the field. On top of that, then, what we're looking at, or Louise is looking at these BYDV tramline trials. And just to highlight here, what we have here in this field here is we've 4 different treatments, if you like, or 3 different treatments. This is untreated, obviously, here. This is treated as your standard treatment. This is using a DSS model here in terms of when you apply your insecticide. And obviously here, then we have a discard out here, which is treated as well. And if you look forward to where that was in April, you won't see any BYDV in that from that angle, okay? There's very, very little BYDV. So that asks the question then, why was that happening? Why weren't we seeing BYDV here? And looking at this here, you will see a little bit of BYDV here for any of that are eagle-eyed. There is a little bit there, but it's not significant, okay? So what that tells us is that there's more going on than just numbers of aphids that are there or just the temperature that is there. What's happening is much more specific in terms of A, the species that's flying, and B, probably the virus, the strain of the virus that they're carrying, because we know there are different strains and there are different species. Similar to COVID, some of us can be affected by COVID, more of us aren't. So it really kind of comes down to trying to develop systems where we can predict the species that are out there, the viruses that they're carrying, and the risk in the environment to our crops. So the overall virus load or viral load, if you like, in the environment. So that's where we're trying to go in future, and probably then give us a bit more accurate advice and more robust advice. As I said earlier on, this is probably one that's really, I think, is working quite well. And it's one that we're all very familiar with in terms of the met air and blight warning system. This is for this week. So you can see here, anybody that's along the coast over here in the west or around the coast here, you are at the risk of having blight cycles in your crop this week. So that obviously puts the onus back on you. What do I decide to do then? This doesn't tell you you have to spray. It tells you you have a decision to make. The risk is high, okay? So that's what this is trying to do. This was revised by Stephen Kildea and his colleagues in Oak Park in 2020. A student by the name of Mladen Kukak revised this from the old system that was there, which was giving a nationwide warning. This gives much more specific advice based on much more localized data. And if you can see here, this is one of the graphs from Dublin Airport. So you can see exactly when the model predicts when the blight event is going to occur and it's going to be at its peak. So you can actually make an intervention and you can spray here if you have to, or if the crop is already gone, you don't have to worry about it, okay? The model doesn't know where your situation is. It's just telling you what's there. And as I say then, it does give the agronomist and the farmer has to make the decision then. It's up to you to make the decision of what your intervention is going to be. For any of you that are growing potatoes this year, and I see 1 or 2 of you in the audience, this didn't necessarily reduce down to the amount of inputs that you were going to put on your crop this year. In fact, there was probably no scope to reduce your inputs in terms of blight fungicides this year. 2018 was a completely different scenario where there certainly was opportunities to reduce down your inputs. So I suppose that gives you an idea that some of these things can be more targeted. I suppose just one of the things we were able to do this year, and I know Vincent was on the trip with me out to Denmark. And this is one of the cross visits that we do as part of the project. So they come here and we go there, as they say. So this was a visit out to a farm or an area on Jutland in Denmark, on the peninsula of Denmark, where we're looking at this issue out here that they're having out here. So believe it or not, there's a crop of wheat in there. Okay, that's Italian ryegrass. And to them, Italian ryegrass is much more significant than blackgrass. They do have blackgrass as well, but Italian ryegrass is becoming more and more and more of a problem. And bearing in mind, which kind of shocked us at the time, they don't have axial out there, so they don't have one of the tools that we have here that controls the Italian ryegrass here. So this Italian ryegrass is pretty much resistant to any of the selective herbicides that they have there. So if you think all of your graminicides, Pacificas, all those type of products, this is resistant, okay? So then you're left with a decision, how do I control that? So really then you're looking at IPM techniques or IPM options. So what they're doing out there, this is what they're doing, and it's all of these, not just some of them, it's all of them. Okay, so the first place of protocol they're doing is a resistance testing, okay? We still offer that service in Oak Park. If anybody has, be it a grassweed or a broadleaf weed, whether it be poppies or chickweed or any of the grassweed species, if you have a query about it, whether you think it might be a problem, we are offering that service for the moment until we see what way it goes. We might get swamped and it might be a different story after that. We're also looking at rotation. Rotation is becoming huge out there, and they're really trying to put as many hurdles as they possibly can. Crop choice, stale seed beds is something that they're really, really going hard at now. They're trying to get as many stale seed beds into the system as they possibly can. That means really switching to spring cropping, all right? So they're trying to do that. They're increasing seeding rates, they're increasing using competitive crops. So they're really trying to stop giving the Italian ryegrass a free run for its money. So they're trying to put as many hurdles in it as possible. And also, when it gets to a stage like this crop here was going for whole crop. So obviously what they were trying to do then is stop seed return back to the soil to make sure as few seeds made it back to the soil for the following crop, okay? And finally, when they really have no other option, and I know this one is not going to be palatable to most people here in the audience, they swap the ground with dairy farmers. They put the field into grass, swap it to dairy farmers in exchange for land that they get off dairy farmers. Now, I don't know how effective that would be here, and I'm not even going to try and guess. So I suppose then just final slide then, you, and just say, where do I think, what are we seeing in the project? I suppose the future, where are we going? We are definitely going to have less reliance on chemicals. We are going to have to plan more. So how we actually go and what we actually do with our fields, with our farms, with our rotations, we're going to have to put in more planning into that to stop us getting to that situation where you've seen just previously. We are going to see more challenges. There's no doubt in the world about that. We definitely are. Decision support tools, as I've said already, can play a part, but we are going to have to use more cultural control methods in terms of controlling those pests, whatever those pests might be. And I suppose finally, really, and I think this is where we're all going to have to own up and take more responsibility for this. It's going to be up to us as farmers to make more of those decisions, to have more of those input into those decisions. I don't think it's fair on our agronomists to be really peppering those people to say, listen, you need to solve a problem for me that I've created. They just don't have the tools to do it. So with that, Ewan, I leave it at that. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. All right.
Okay, thanks, Shay. We have a few minutes for any questions from the floor. If anybody would have a question for any of the panel, Cara, Andrew, or Shay. Yeah, just here in the front, Ollie, Kieran, thanks. Go ahead, Ollie.
Yeah, just to Andrew there, when he was going through the regulations there, where does it sit with the EU that probably the vast majority of animal feed in this country is coming imported from countries that have everyday use of chemicals that have been banned by the Food Safety Authority in EU. Under some of them, we have been pointed out, some of them have been banned on human consumers' health concerns and more on environment. So for a farmer here in Ireland, none of us want to spend money on chemicals, that's for sure. But when we look and see what's going down the same and going into the same feed mix that we produce, that EU says this is fine. This stuff contains all these chemicals that have been banned.
Sorry,
And it
Ollie,
goes in-
I'm just going to have to, I have people shouting at me for time, but just the quick question, can you?
Yeah, the question is how do reconcile the fact that our competition has a free run at this, and when you say we ban this chemical on consumers' health concerns, how is the EU let it come freely in here? That's the question.
Well,
So,
the answer
Andrew,
is that we don't really let products come in here. There are MRLs established for products which come into Europe. We have a very comprehensive sampling program. It's one of the biggest sampling programs in the world for pesticides. Where exceedances are found, products are rejected. I have a team of people who carry out audits in third countries where there are problems with pesticide residue limits being exceeded. So my team has been all over the world, and in cases where there are exceedances and there is no way of addressing it, then we have legislation to ban the export of those products to Europe, if that's the case. So
Andrew, just to be clear, you're saying that the countries that use these chemicals that are banned, if the MRL levels are not exceeded, they're okay. I would have thought that MRL levels only apply to legally applied chemicals to keep them under limits. When a chemical is banned outright, I don't think MRL levels come into the picture. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. So, Dermot, one question there, please.
Yeah, there's one here online for either Shay or indeed probably Andrew, really. Will there be funding to help adapt some of the IPM technologies? And there's an example given here of a sclerotinia forecast developed by the AHDB in the UK that could be adopted using Irish weather stations, but it would need funding to adapt.
Well, I can't answer the question about a specific program. I'm afraid I don't know. But yes, funding and support of IPM. In fact, the IPM Works project that's just been mentioned, along with other projects, are EU-funded projects. So there's a lot of funding and research. There's a new round of research under Horizon Europe, which prioritises Green Deal, including this area of work. There's been an awful lot of submissions relevant to IPM. We see whether they'll be agreed or not. And the legislation, as I've explained, also proposes that, it's hard to explain, but in the Common Agricultural Policy, there's basically what's called a baseline. So at the moment, there are various things that you have to do, and you get your money if you do them. You're punished if you don't do them. And then there's various actions which you have to demonstrate you go above the legal baseline, the agro-environmental schemes. So there's two pockets of money, if you will. What the proposal is here is that baseline is removed for a 5-year period, so that basically you can use the agro-environmental funding to support legal compliance, including examples like this. That's a decision for the member states.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So Shay, I'm gonna very quick, and then Bobby has a quick question.
Yeah, just on that, just to bring it to a more local level, we're already seeing Dermot TAMS do approve, say, equipment that you can use that stops you having to use or facilitates you not having to use pesticides. And Holland toppers are one that I can think off the top of my head. When Reglone was banned, Holland toppers are now available under TAMS, so you can apply for those under TAMS. So it's a way of funding those.
Okay, thanks, Shay. Bobby.
Yeah, again, directed at Andrew. Could you expand a little bit on the sensitive areas and the meaning of that? I've seen images of where this could affect a lot of tillage land, full fields, half fields. So could you expand on that definition, or where do you think that's going to go? Because this seems to be fairly important going forward, that a lot of tillage land could be taken out of production.
I can talk for about 3 hours on sensitive areas, and it's very difficult to give a very quick answer. But to try and give a very quick answer, there are two groups of sensitive areas. There are urban areas. So here we're talking about green areas like playing fields, parks, footpaths, where people exist within the urban centres. And then there are environmentally sensitive areas. So these are areas which are designated by the member state as being particular environmental sensitivity, like the Burren, which is a Natura 2000 protected area. And here we are proposing specific action regarding reducing pesticide use, which is currently a legal requirement already, to reduce and minimise pesticide use in those areas. What the legislation proposes has been changed by the Commission under a non-paper. So basically, within those environmentally sensitive areas, we propose that you can use normal pesticides and biocontrol substances, but not the candidates for substitution, the more hazardous substances, which is what we expect member states should be doing under the current legal requirements. But if you want to talk in more detail, I can talk separately. There's a very substantial document on this, and it's a difficult thing to answer very quickly.
Okay, we'll just take one more. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Bobby.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I suppose it's encouraging to see the progress on, some behind the targets and if 50% reduction and that sort of thing. But I think the sensitive area is a major thing. To echo Bobby's point, it's a major concern for growers, and I don't think it's kind of as simple really as the burn. But there are other, major areas beside riverbanks, the kind of archaeological areas where pesticide usage could be hugely restricted. So I do think, the Irish context, we're trying to grow the sector. We know it's a very environmentally friendly sector, but I think legislation like this coming down the tracks is going to really challenge it. So I do think at a member state level, we are going to need some flexibility in that. The other thing in the wider SUR, I suppose, is in the requirement for independent advice. I think it's going to be very, very challenging for Ireland because we have so few independent agronomists. So in order to change that, we're going to need significant funding to attract, to get people into independent agronomy, really. That's also a major issue for Ireland. I know you're dealing with at a wider European level, but they are, sensitive areas are a huge issue for Ireland, I think. So it's just to make the point.
Thanks, Max. And I think that last point about the agronomy is absolutely essential because we see it in Ireland. There's a shortage of that skill space. So I'm sorry if you have any more questions, maybe you might catch the speakers towards the end of the session. We have to move on, I'm afraid, because we obviously have a virtual audience as well. So I want to thank Cara, Shay and Andrew for the content, and thank you everybody for your questions.